Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar on using your Adam Matthew digital collections for digital humanities work. We've still got a few people who are joining us, but please don't worry if you do join late. We are recording the session and everybody will get a copy of that recording. So my name's Ben Lacey. I'm the head of outreach at AM Digital. For those who are new to Adam Matthew, we partner with libraries and archives all over the world to digitize their primary source holdings and present them online. The result is tens of millions of pages of digitized documents housed in various online collections. We'll be talking about these and using them for DH today. But before we get started, I did want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So if you have any audio issues, can I recommend leaving the meeting and rejoining, making sure that you select the audio option that's best for you. Computer audio is what we would recommend, and just checking your input there. Hopefully, if you can't hear me now, you can read the instructions at the top of the screen there, so that should help you out. If you have any audio issues during the webinar as we're going along, you will have a side panel where there's a little sound check function at the top of it. So just have a look at that to see if it's something to do with your system. My colleague Holly is on hand to answer any technical issues that come her way as well. And worst case scenario, like I say, we're recording, so you'll be able to review things after the session as well. This is your little box where you've got some control over this. So if you haven't used GoToWebinar before, you can see this panel. Everyone apart from me is muted at the moment. The main thing that I would highlight here is the questions box. If you put something in there, both me and Holly can see that. You can ask questions as we're going along, and I will come to them at the end to answer them. If they are technical questions, Holly will be working to cover that for you whilst I'm presenting, so you won't have to wait too long, hopefully. Do put your questions in as we go along. If there's anything that comes up that you would like more information on, I'll be leaving plenty of time for us to cover those at the end of today's session, which should run to about 30 minutes in total. In terms of what today looks like for us, so there are two main things that I wanted to cover. AM Digital's data mining policy, including the data that you can request and how it can be delivered to you. And then also some practical examples, one data mining project and some digital assignments that have been used by instructors to give you a taste of what can be done with this. After this live webinar, we will be following up with a copy of the recording and some links to additional information on our website. That will also contain a very short survey. And I do have a request, actually. I wanted to flag this survey now and ask if it's OK for you to take 5 minutes to fill it in. The aim is to have more information on what you need from us and how we can better support your work in the digital humanities. So the more people who fill in that follow-up survey, the more we'll be able to help you in future. So let's get started on Adam Matthew's data mining policy. I've included a summary on this slide, but we will go into more detail in a little bit. For any collection your library has purchased from Adam Matthew Digital, you have the right to use metadata, transcripts, and some additional feature data for projects that you might want to work on from a text and data mining perspective. Just to flesh some of this information out, I mentioned OCR transcripts and also double keyed transcripts that people have done by hand. Those are the ones that we currently offer. Some of you will be aware that we have handwritten text recognition technology in some of our manuscript collections, which is currently used to support keyword searching within the site itself. That works off of probability at the moment, so there's not a transcript to go along with it. However, our team have been working very hard on getting that program to produce transcripts. So watch this space, because in the future, that will be something that you'll be able to use as well. The reason that I say data from some additional features can be included here is that it's often work that has been done by researchers and academics who have collaborated with us. We've obviously licensed that work for use in our collections, but some of them might want to have permission asked first before they shared that further. Some might not want to share the data because it's part of a wider project that they're working on. But where you can use it, we try to make it as easy as possible. For example, being able to download that additional feature data from the site. I will come on to some of the ways in which you can access it. The only thing I would flag at this stage is that FTP is, generally speaking, people's preferred method for getting hold of the metadata and the transcripts, because obviously they are harder to use direct from the live sites for most people. Before we do cover that, though, I wanted to talk maybe a little bit more clearly about exactly what I mean when I say you can request the metadata and the transcripts from your Adam Matthew collections. So I'm using Church Missionary Society periodicals as my example. All Adam Matthew collections have metadata applied to the primary sources that we have digitized. This will be produced by our in-house editorial team, and it often uses the archive catalogue as a base point. It will often be done in conjunction with the cataloguers at the source archive as well. That means that terminology and metadata fields and level of detail as well can vary between different collections, but there will always be something there. And obviously, this is something that is used in the site to enhance discoverability by giving people the ability to search that metadata and find documents that are relevant for their work. When it comes to data mining, though, this is some of the data that you can request. So we have our document from Church Missionary Society periodicals here, and the metadata, as I'm sure you can see, is the bit that's under the thumbnails. So it's things like keywords, it's dates, it's countries or places that are named in the document. You will often have names in there as well in other collections. All of that can be exported for you to use. Here's a page from the same document that we were just looking at. Now, for printed material in Adam Matthew collections, we will run it through an OCR program, and that will produce a full text transcript. So I've kind of zoomed in on a bit of that page, and you can see a little bit of the transcript that's relevant for the bottom two paragraphs coming up there. Chiefly done for accessibility reasons, so that screen readers can still make use of the digitized archives that Adam Matthew publish. But of course, there is a DH element here where people might want to use the full text transcripts as part of text mining projects. So that is something that we offer as well as part of our exports. I mentioned that some material has been double key transcribed by people rather than OCR'd by machine. A good example of that is our 18th century journals collection. The 18th century is quite well known for having difficult typefaces for OCR programs to deal with. And obviously there's an issue of the documents themselves and the condition they're in and the problems that gives to OCR. So for that collection, for example, we actually double key transcribed all of the documents in it, and that produces a much more accurate transcript, makes it much nicer for text mining purposes. So how do you actually get hold of the metadata and the full text data that is in these collections? Well, I mentioned that there were three different ways of doing this, and that FTP tends to be people's preferred method. So what does that look like? Well, what we would do is create a zipped file for a collection like Church Missionary Society periodicals, for example, and we would transfer that to you. And within that file, you would find one XML file per document. That can only work if you've got an FTP client like FileZilla, but most people will have that set up. There'll be somebody at the library, I'm sure many of you who are in attendance today, who would be the person that faculty or librarians get in touch with maybe to get access to data that they want for their projects. So we'd set up a file transfer system with you and move it onto a hard drive or a computer of your choice at your end. I'll show you what the XML document would actually look like when you open that up in a second. What do we need from you for that? Well, there is a form for you to fill in, because obviously you will then have a copy of the data. Most people prefer that because it then gives you a degree of control over it. People can come to somebody at the library if they're interested in running a project. You don't need to be constantly coming back and forth to Adam Matthew. It's your copy, and you can use that for various different projects and various different classes if wanted. The downside is that you do need to have secure storage for that data. So the form is really just about checking that there's a secure server at the library or your institution that will allow you to save that data and have it there. There's a 3-year period on that as well, so you get to keep it for 3 years. After those 3 years, you get back in touch, let us know you still want it, and you can keep it, or you get back in touch and say, no, the project's over now, we're going to remove this data now from our systems. The other 2 options there is an API option. It requires slightly more advanced coding skills from the end user. So the idea here really is that a faculty member or a researcher or even a student would maybe be interacting with the data through an API themselves rather than through the library. We can support that, of course. There's an advantage that there's no storage required at your end. The disadvantage is that it's not as accessible for everyone at the institution. It does take a little bit of time as well. We would load the data into the API as per requests that come in. So it might sound like it would be the quicker option because it's all done remotely, but actually FTP can often be the quickest option if you want data turned around in nice quick time. The external hard drive is still an option. You basically get exactly the same as the FTP, but it's provided via post rather than file transfer. It's there if you want it. There is an additional charge for that because of the cost of postage and having the hard drive. And yeah, I think there are so clear advantages to the FTP option that really is something that you should consider if you are thinking about the hard drive as an option. Very happy to follow up with anyone, by the way. I appreciate that this webinar today is going to be quite a lot of information in quite a quick succession. So we'll obviously provide all of these details as follow-up. And then if you would like things going through in more detail, if you would like to get in touch just to go through the process of what all of this looks like, we're very happy to do that. This is really about knowledge sharing and making sure you're aware of your rights when it comes to using the collections that you've purchased. What do these things look like then? So say we did a file transfer, you would get a folder on your server. And when you open that folder, you'd have a series of XML files. And when you opened one of those XML files, this is what you get. And this is the document from Church Missionary Society periodicals that we were looking at earlier, just in XML form. So the metadata is all at the top of the file. And then on a page-by-page basis, there will follow the full text transcript. So for a collection like Church Missionary Society periodicals, you're going to end up with several thousand files like this in that collection folder that we export to you. And there's really no limit on the number of collection folders we can export. If you own everything that Adam Matthew publish, you are well within your rights to request copies of the data for that, if that's what you are interested in. We are always happy to advise on the collections that are more relevant or perhaps more suitable for text and data mining projects, because as I'm sure some of you are aware, Adam Matthew published quite a variety of material and not all of it is printed periodicals like Church Missionary Society or 18th century journals. How can you or people at your institution use the data? Well, that's really up to you and the research and teaching that you wish to apply it to. The only restrictions we really put on it are aligned to what we owe to our kind of copyright holders and the people we license this material from. So you can't publish original images or raw data openly online. You would need to check with the original rights holders. That's not Adam Matthew, that's the people who own the copyright on the items that we have digitized, and source archives if they have rights related to those as well. So that's the restriction, I guess. In terms of what you can do with it in-house, it really is pretty much anything that you could be interested in. And if you produce work as a result, so if you have a project that produces a really interesting paper, if you have a class of students who produce a set of visualizations or build a set of websites that use that data, obviously we're very happy for those end results to be in the public domain. We're very happy for those end results to be published wherever the researcher sees fit. And we're very happy to promote that work as well. We're really keen to get more people engaging with research and teaching that has been done with Adam Matthew collections and with the data that sits within them. And you can see some examples in the tweets there of where we've done this in the past. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the data you can access, how you would get hold of it, and what you can do with it once you have it. I just want to provide a couple of examples that perhaps flesh that out a little bit more, and actually give a practical representation of what people can and have done with this material. So I'm going to start by highlighting something that was actually an in-house project that was done as part of our 18th century drama collection. But this is now available for you to look at and explore, and I would really encourage you to do so once you've seen the story behind it, I guess. So where do we start? Well, we start with the London Stage, 1660 to 1800, which is a reference work published by Southern Illinois University Press between 1960 and 1968. They published it in 4 parts and 12 volumes, and it amounts to over 8,000 pages. And what those pages do is document over 114,000 theatrical performances that happened in London between 1660 and 1800. These include cast lists, they include the theatre that they were performed at, the date, and also notable comments as well. It is an essential reference work, but it's also a data set with huge potential. So we digitized hard copies of this document so that people will be able to go through page by page from their computer at home or in the office as they would with a paper copy if they were referencing it in the library. But we also realized that digitization presented an opportunity to turn the information on the pages into something much more user-friendly and interactive when you are using it online. We wanted to extract the information and put it into a fully searchable database. Then we wanted to use that same data to create analysis and visualizations that could further future research. So how did we do this? Well, we started with the very data exports that we were talking about in the first half of this webinar. We took the document, we ran it through an OCR program, and we got our OCR transcript. Now, OCR has improved significantly in recent years, and especially for scans of typeset 20th century material, it is very, very accurate, but it is never perfect. And as anybody who's run a text mining project using transcripts knows, things that you can get away with if you're using something for keyword searching really get highlighted when you're trying for absolute accuracy in a text mining project. In the case of the London Stage, the volumes are very big. So this led to curvature of the pages during scanning in the middle of the volumes, and there were occasional errors in the OCR as a result of that. So the first stage was cleanup of the OCR transcript. It was a small number of images that actually needed doing, so it was possible, but it was still very time consuming, and it certainly gave us a clear indication of what it takes to run a project like this. So it was an interesting task for us to do as well. The cleaned up text then had to be marked up in XML so that it can be read and analysed by a computer. So what we wanted to do is pull out the location, for example. In this case, it's Drury Lane. A code is used, DL. So you need to teach the computer essentially that every time it sees DL in the same place on the page, that's a location indication for Drury Lane. The advantage that we had in marking this up is that it's really consistent because of the type of document it is. A lot of this was done initially by hand, but as more examples came through, you can start to automate some of the cleanup because you can expect things to appear on the same places in the page. There is still so much manual work involved in this though, and that's something that I think maybe people miss with digital humanities work, is that it is still a lot of work. You know, the computer can only do so much and it needs your input in order to do it. But once this was done, our data was ready to be used. So this is what we did with it. If you would like to find every performance of Romeo and Juliet that happened at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, instead of going through 8,000 pages, you can now search Romeo and Juliet in our database and filter by Theatre Royal Drury Lane, and you will get all 157 of those performances. You will also get information about the cast and the characters that they played in those performances, the date that it happened, and so on. And you can search these entries by keyword, actor, role, performance title, and filter by date and theatre. So that's like the user interaction. We then wanted to use this data for some analysis. So we created a series of what we call data association tools that can tell you the relationships between theatres, actors, works performed, roles and dates, who appeared most frequently at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, how many performances of the Beggar's Opera were put on there relative to other theatres. Of course, something to highlight straight away at this point is that these tools are always designed to open up further questions. So the obvious one that would always spring to mind is, why is this a trend that we are seeing? And the beautiful thing about having this type of resource built on a primary source collection, like the ones from Adam Matthew, is that the user can return to the primary sources within the wider collection and look for answers to these questions. So the digitized surrogates of the original volumes that this data came from are all available to look at as well. So you can go back and check the original source, but also the original scripts, the original prompt books and things like that from the 18th century that form the kind of wider collection are also available. So you can then go back and say, okay, I want to look at the documents that are associated with David Garrick in order to find out why he had such a close connection with this particular work that was performed. The same goes for the last bit that I want to highlight on this. So as well as data associations, we wanted to do some visual analysis and visualizations. So there are some frequency charts as well. To take just one example, you can look at the number of performances per year at a given theatre and ask, for example, when John Rich moved his theatre from Lincoln's Inn Fields to Covent Garden, did performances increase? We can find out on this graph. We can also ask, did his great rival who ran the theatre at Drury Lane do better or worse than him over the same time period? How many performances were going on there? And I would encourage you to explore this data set further. We'll provide a link as follow-up. And the really good news for everyone on this webinar is that this is an open access portion of the 18th century drama site. So absolutely everyone can access and use this. The very last item that I wanted to touch on before we take questions is digital assignments for students, because I'm very aware of the fact that DH is not all about text and data mining. There are many other elements to it as well, including at a level that does not place computational approaches at the heart of study. So the very act of putting archival material online is part of DH, and so is using these materials for assignments. Even better is when those assignments have a digital presentation element to them to help show the students that they are scholars themselves and that they have research to showcase. So plenty of classes have used Adam Matthew collections for traditional research and then presented their findings in digital media. I've provided a few examples here, and again, we'll share the links afterwards. Sometimes this is a blog piece. Sometimes the students have created interactive tools such as maps and timelines. Sometimes classes have edited Wikipedia and other online information sites. We even have examples of students who have built websites with interactive features related to the documents that they have found and researched within AM Digital collections. So we would always encourage this. Although none of the examples I link to here use images from our collections in the final presentations, tutors and students are welcome to contact source archives and copyright holders to use the images in this way if they wanted to. I would just reiterate what I said earlier about the data. The same applies for the images in the collection. Adam Matthew are not the copyright holder, so we can't grant permissions ourselves. We can't make judgments on what is and isn't fair use. But if you would like more information or you would like us to help you obtain permission for reuse, we can do that as well. And that's something that the outreach team at Adam Matthew can offer some support with. So that's what I wanted to highlight today. I just wanted to note that I do have some follow-up links. So these will be some of the things that we share with you afterwards, so you can take more of a look. This includes some links to further projects. So I highlighted the London Stage database, but there have been other ones recently that have used Adam Matthew data, and we can send a link round to that as well. It only remains for me to thank you for your time in joining me, and I'm going to now move on to questions. So I'll have a look at any that have come in, and I will invite you to add any others as well that you might want to add into that at this opportunity. I'm going to start. What I will do to make this a little bit more interactive is share a webcam, hopefully. Hi. And stop sharing my screen for the Q&A portion of this. So we do have a few questions. So one question that has come in: do individual license agreements need to be signed for data delivery / use? It's a really good question. No is the short answer there. Basically, a lot of this is actually covered in the license agreement that you will have already signed when you purchased Adam Matthew collections. So if you have access to some, there is a clause in that license that covers the provision of text and metadata for this. And so in that sense, this is covered. What that license agreement also says is that there's a form that needs to be filled in order to access the data. But you could fill in one form and we could provide the data for you in one kind of quick and easy go there. So that should hopefully come as good news. The only addition that I would say to that is we're obviously really interested to know how the data is being used. So although it isn't required, if there's an opportunity to stay in touch with you and continue to offer support and to continue to hear about where your research and teaching is going with it, that is something that we would certainly want to do as well. So if that's something that you'd be interested in, we would. So second question about how large are FTP files in terms of megabytes or gigabytes. Actually not that large on the whole. So we are talking a couple of hundred megabytes for one of the zipped folders for a collection that has maybe a mix of printed material, images and manuscripts. For something like Church Missionary Society periodicals, where all of the material has got those full text transcripts, that goes up a bit. But we're still only probably looking around the 400 megabyte mark. That is something to say about Adam Matthew collections, and it kind of answers another question about, you know, ideal ways of using this. So there's a question about how we would recommend maybe certain collections and what collections we would recommend. There's probably too many to go through right now, but we can share some details on that afterwards. But I think where I would kind of tie this into the size of those files, I think what it speaks to is that we're not talking about the type of data sets that you would maybe get with HathiTrust or Google Books or Chronicle in America, you know, those huge newspaper and printed book collections that are available. Adam Matthew collections have always been more focused. There's always been a real attention to detail on making sure that the metadata there and that the quality is very high. And that means that the data sets that you get will be a bit smaller than maybe some of the other ones that you've used in approaches. The good news is that you're very welcome to just put that data with other sources to create a bigger data set. So I definitely recommend that. I think some things stand out. We've got a collection called American Indian Newspapers, which is about 200 years of print journalism from various different indigenous groups across North America. And again, it's not as big as some of the bigger newspaper archives that you might be able to get access to, but what it does do is offer quite a nice corrective against the very Anglo-centric nature, I guess, of a lot of newspaper collections. And by adding that data in, you're maybe getting a more rounded text mining project. So yeah, the files aren't big. They should be able to be stored on servers at your institutions. And in terms of then using that data, adding it to wider sets that are available, or using it for smaller projects always works. It also makes for a really nice smaller data set that maybe students who are doing a digital humanities program could work with. It's not as overwhelming as downloading the whole of HathiTrust, for example. Any other questions at this stage? We've got about another minute if anybody does. And if not, then I will just thank you again for your time today. Look out for that recording, and please do fill in that survey to help us do even more to support your work in this area. Thank you so much, everyone.